Since 1960, the world has poured over $1 trillion into Africa. Aid, loans, debt relief packages, all with above $1 trillion. And yet today, more than 430 million people still live on less than $2.15 a day. So here's the uncomfortable question. What if the money wasn't the solution? What if, in many cases, it was quietly making things worse? This is not a "Africa is hopeless" video. It's the opposite, because the countries that figured this out are thriving. And the pattern they followed is something every nation on Earth could learn from. Once you see it, you'll never look at foreign aid the same way again. To understand where we are, we need to go back to 1960. The 1960s were the decade of African independence. The flags changed. The anthems changed. But here's what didn't change: the economic skeleton underneath. Colonial powers had built roads and railways across Africa, but not to connect African cities to each other. They were built to move resources out: cotton, rubber, gold, straight to European ports. Think of it like inheriting a house with no kitchen, no bedroom, just a loading dock. These new nations inherited economies designed for extraction, not for building. They needed money fast, and the world was ready to lend it. During the Cold War, those loans had almost nothing to do with development. The US, the Soviet Union, France, they were handing out money like political candy. The logic: keep this government on our side. Mobutu Sese Seko, one of the most corrupt leaders in African history, received billions from Western lenders, not despite his corruption, sometimes almost because of it. Then came the 1980s. Interest rates spiked, commodity prices crashed, dozens of nations couldn't repay. The IMF stepped in with structural adjustment programs. The deal? We'll help with your debt, but you must cut government spending, privatize state companies, open your markets. Imagine drowning in debt and someone offers to save you, but only if you fire half your staff, sell your furniture, and leave the front door open permanently. Some reforms made sense. Others gutted healthcare and education in countries that could least afford it. As Zambian economist Dambisa Moyo argued in Debt Aid, these cycles of borrowing and relief weren't lifting countries out of poverty. They were locking them in. The numbers are staggering. Sub-Saharan Africa's debt service, as a share of government revenue, tripled between 2014 and 2024. Today, nearly $1 in every $5 a government earns goes straight to foreign creditors, not to schools, not to hospitals, to debt. But here's where it gets complicated, because most people already think they know who the villain is. China, the Belt and Road, debt trap diplomacy, clean story, villain with a plan. Except, the data tells a different story. China holds roughly 11 to 20% of Africa's external public debt. Significant, but not the majority. Multilateral institutions hold a large chunk, and increasingly, private commercial creditors, hedge funds, bondholders, charge the highest interest rates of anyone and get talked about the least. Think of it this way: you have 3 credit cards, a government subsidy, a business loan, and a payday lender charging 15% interest. Everyone's debating the second card. The payday lender is quietly the most expensive one in your wallet. And those feared asset seizures? Johns Hopkins researchers who studied African debt distress cases found no comparable asset seizures on the continent. Not in Zambia, not in Angola. China has actually canceled and restructured billions in African debt, not out of generosity, but because when your borrower collapses, you lose too. The real crisis isn't a heist. It's something far more structural. And to understand it, you need to understand what happens to incentives when free money arrives. Why does borrowed money, money that could build roads and hospitals, so often leave countries poorer? It's about incentives. Why build a painful tax collection system when foreign money keeps arriving? Why push unpopular reforms when the next loan covers the budget gap? This is what economists call moral hazard. Easy external money removes the pressure to build the internal systems that create lasting prosperity. No accountability, no institutions. And without institutions, every new loan is just fuel for the same broken engine. Then there's the currency trap. Most African debt is borrowed in US dollars. When global interest rates rise, as they did sharply after 2022, debt costs increase. When local currencies weaken, the burden grows, even without borrowing a single dollar more. It's like a mortgage that automatically increases whenever your neighbor gets a raise. Ghana experienced this brutally. By 2022, Ghana was spending over 70% of government revenue on debt service and wages alone. Almost nothing left for actual governance. The currency collapsed. The IMF intervened. Again. And then there are the white elephants, conference centers, stadium highways with no traffic, prestige projects that photograph well at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, but generate almost no economic return. In 1987, Thomas Sankara, revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, stood before the Organization of African Unity and said something that still cuts today. Debt is a cleverly managed reconquest of Africa. Those who lend us money are those who colonized us before. He was assassinated months later, but the structural trap he described has never really been dismantled, only repackaged. But here's the thing about traps. Some people find the exit. In 1966, Botswana was one of the poorest countries on Earth. Then, they found diamonds. Resource wealth in Africa has historically been a curse, attracting corruption, fueling conflict, destroying accountability. Botswana did something radical. They saved it. Sovereign wealth fund, low debt, investment in education and institutions that outlasted individual leaders. Today, Botswana has one of the highest per capita incomes in sub-Saharan Africa. The resource was the same as everywhere else. The governance was different. That difference is everything. Rwanda in 1994 was defined by unimaginable tragedy. 800,000 people killed in 100 days. And yet, Rwanda chose differently. A relentless focus on institutions, anti-corruption, and technology turned Kigali into one of the most efficiently run cities on the continent. Rwanda's model is imperfect and contested, but the lesson is undeniable. Deliberate governance outperforms raw capital inflows every time. And then there's the big structural shift almost nobody is discussing loudly enough. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, the largest free trade zone in the world by participating countries. 54 nations, 1.4 billion people, trading with each other, building supply chains within the continent, keeping value-added jobs at home. It's early and messy, but the architecture exists. And here's the geopolitical twist. Right now, the US, China, and Europe are competing fiercely for African partnerships. African governments with strong institutions can leverage that competition, negotiate better terms, attract quality investment, play the bidders against each other. The same debt dynamics that trapped previous generations could become a tool for the next one, but only if the institutions are there to wield it. So let's come back to where we started. $1 trillion and hundreds of millions still in poverty. The easy explanation is greed, corruption, China, the West. The real one is more uncomfortable and ultimately more hopeful. Money without institutions doesn't build countries. It feeds whatever systems already exist. The cycle can be broken. It has been broken. And the generation of African economists and reformers pushing right now for domestic revenue, debt transparency, and intra-African trade, they know this better than any foreign lender ever has. Thomas Sankara warned about debt as reconquest in 1987. 38 years later, the continent is finally building the architecture to prove him wrong. Watch how African governments navigate the growing competition between the US, China, and the EU over the next 12 months. For the first time in a long time, The borrowers have leverage. Whether they use it wisely will tell us everything. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, then please subscribe and like this video. And if you have anything to share, drop it in the comment below. I read each and every comment. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.